Welcome everybody to yet another podcast around inverted PM, inverted products, where we talk about security, identity, and all the other things that are a bit weird in the world of product management and sales, because success is when nothing happens. And when lines go up, it might not be positive, it might be negative, but if they go down, it actually is positive because we want to stop attackers. And everything is different for us. Our users are different, our strategy is different. Our metrics are different, and in our podcast series we discuss all of these things. So when you're building inverted products, or when you're selling them or managing them, this is the place to be. And feel free to connect to all of us on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn community where you can find us. And joining me today again, as always, are Dario, Dana, and Tom, all of them in their normal homes, I believe, and you can find them all on LinkedIn. And we have another special guest in this recording, in this episode. Tim, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And Tim is a CISO from the industry, really amazing person, and you can also find him on LinkedIn. And as always, we represent our own views, not the companies we work for. We just discuss our experience in building, managing, and launching inverted products in the hopes that it'll help you do so better as well. And today we want to talk about something that's close to my heart as I build products, is that there's kind of two types of customers. There's small customers, we call those SMBs, and there's large customers, enterprises, those companies that have thousands of seats. And they require fundamentally different approaches to inverted products, to security, to abuse, etc. And Dario, I want to start with you. You've helped both small and big customers with security. Can you describe a bit, how are they different? Like big customers versus small customers. What are some of the characteristics that are different?
I think it starts with the expectations. Like small customers, they expect things to be secure. And so the expectation is whatever they get by default, it meets the requirement of the times. Like it meets the current requirements in terms of technology, security, privacy, and everything else. And large enterprises, they expect to get a system that they can control and adjust and implement according to their own policies, to their business regulatory requirements. So yeah, I would say it's really the expectations on which people have that are very different from the two different companies.
So expectations different, Tim. Tim, a question for you. You've seen users in large and small companies. Are the users also different and their requirements?
Yeah, I think in a large company, you can be a bit of more of a number, and so you've got to scale up to support those users. And so I think you're going to find more diversity in cases, but you also have to scale up your support for those users in those cases. And for what I would say is, when you're at our scale, you end up having this problem. You have a user that's your expected user, and they do the things you expect every day, but you have so many corner cases because the user in California is not the user in China, is not the user in Iran or the UK. And suddenly you're realizing that diversity causes so many problems in every application and thing you're setting up.
Tom, you seem to be nodding. Do you see some of these problems with bigger customers, and do SMBs have different problems?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I deal more with the bigger fish than the smaller ones. But what Tim just said it really rang true, actually, from some work I did over the summer, where we were kind of looking at an enterprise identity governance installation, which was really struggling with performance because there were so many customizations, right, in the environment based on local business practices, organic stuff that builds up over time. And it was really, really a struggle for them to essentially kind of get the blanket to cover their toes as well as their shoulders, as it were. They just couldn't stretch the technology far enough to address all of these use cases. So I see it very much. And actually, what I would say back to Tim, and obviously the recommendation I would make in a circumstance like that is, don't stretch your tooling in a direction that it's not supposed to go, but and update some of your local business practices in line with what works best out of the box. It's easier said than done in most cases, but I wonder what your experience of that is.
I think updating business processes is useful, but especially the larger you are, the harder it is. Like change a business process that's global, it's just the number of checks and people and committees involved is always going to be problematic. But a lot of the local business practices are there because of a local difference. I think one of my favorite evergreen topics is like data residency and services you use. And it seems like, especially today, every country and every region wants their own data governance. Keep US data in the US and keep European data in Europe and Chinese data in China and Russia data in Russia. That sounds great until you actually try to build a system in a multinational company. And you're like, that's not how any of this works. So we want it to be simple, but we are often just dealing with the reality of the world that we live in.
So basically, Tom, you're saying, rather than trying to make the blanket spread over the shoulders and the toes, I love it, try to pull your toes in. And then Tim is saying, well, that might not always be possible because of the reality. And I think enterprises, they said, deal with a lot of complexity, but then SMBs, they deal with users that just do whatever they want, because the person who's leading an SMB is doing security and taking out the trash potentially, and fixing the printer and talking to customers and doing the admin. So Dana, like what are some of those challenges for SMBs in security?
They're not experts in these individual fields. Their resources are extremely thin because it's just them, right? They really rely more on like out of the box solutions, things that just happen, get it done. They can't afford to do all the customization. They might inherit customization that they have cobbled together over time, but what they really need is the systems to do things for them automatically, because it's not their primary focus to do this security or handle the IT. It's just part-time, right? And so the systems really need to be simple for them and easy to use, and understanding of what they're doing, and flexibility. They probably they probably have to hire someone to do things more flexible, and
So say lack of expertise, lack of resources, maybe also lack of awareness, but then they are also attacked in different ways, right? And I want to ask you as well, Dana, like, how do you think attackers of small businesses are different from the attackers on enterprise companies?
Well, in some respects, attackers are opportunistic, taking over small business. So if they stumble on them in their broad attacks and they find out that they see their weaknesses, then they'll exploit them. There is some targeted attacks, though, that specifically go at small businesses that can have high value return. An example is something when I was buying my last house was like really prevalent, was like attackers going over targeting small real estate agents, because if they could get you to send a down payment, it's a huge payoff, and there's a whole lot of seams. It's really easy for them to get around any security measures you have in place. On the flip side, for these small businesses and these real estate agents, it's really hard to put processes or even know processes or procedures, systems that they should put in place to protect themselves. So it really depends. I think on an enterprise side, you have the opportunistic, kind of the drive-bys and things like that. You have like someone gets malware on their computer, they pop all the cookies, and they're like, oh, I have access into this company. So there's some drive-by, but there's a lot more. The targeted enterprise attacks are much more planned, right? Like, and there's much more scouting and figuring out what's going on and looking at policies for, depending on the adversary. And there's more adversaries willing to spend that time for larger companies. So it is kind of different. I think you have drive-bys, you have a smaller set of bad guys targeting smaller companies, but you have a larger set going after bigger companies. Persistently, right?
Yeah, this happened to a friend of mine this week who called me up, and they just sold their company, and they needed to pay taxes, so they got an email from someone else that they forwarded to the bank, and then right after the bank he received another email from this company that told him where to pay his tax with a different IBAN in a different country, and he was like, the tax regulations from this country doesn't have an account in Portugal with Bank Santander. That's not how this works. But he hadn't seen it. He was on his phone with his kids, so he just forwarded the second email also to his bank. And luckily, there was a bank employee who was like, "Hey, this is a Portuguese account for a tax payment to a Northern European country. That is not how this works."
Right.
And so
Right.
they were really lucky that they picked that there was a certain employee there. And the funny thing is, I think in enterprises you can, and this is, I want to ask this a bit to Tom. Like in bigger enterprises, I think you can use processes, right, to catch some of this, and smaller companies can't really do that. Sorry, Danny, you want to?
Before, there's one other thing I want to talk about that we didn't really address. I mean, we mentioned it in the description, but large enterprises have to potentially deal with nation state and these advanced persistent threats that are willing to wait years and years and years and scout out, go into your supply chain, figure out any seams that they can get into. And small businesses don't usually have to worry about and that's really sophisticated attacks that some of the enterprises see, particularly in like if they're of a high value business or they have certain data that these nation states want. So I think enterprises have things coming from many different directions, Adam, that they need to worry about.
Yeah. Tom?
I would take that point and then run it maybe directly into the kind of product manager, product design kind of part of the question, which is to say, like, you have obviously within kind of like enterprise security products platforms, a demand from these enterprises to kind of be able to twiddle the knobs and perform like true identity security posture management, like in an active way to defend against like these APTs, for example. But then you have the differing demand of just make it work and get out of my way for the SMBs. And what I've seen in a couple of platforms, and it is a more prevalent approach, is two things. So first of all, having the flexibility built into the system, but obviously then coming with what like Microsoft, for example, would call secure defaults. So like in the context of Entra, like put on 2FA. This is a secure default. It'll be there out of the box. And if you want to switch it off, that's your call for whatever operational purposes. Make sure you have a break glass account. This is a secure default. Make sure that it's there. So even an enterprise that turns it on, never touches it, and basically has the guy with the global admin credential who's also signing into YouTube with the same thing, at least the basics are in some way covered. And that takes you to a large extent out of the opportunistic bracket. But then a larger enterprise that will have kind of like a red tenant and all of these kind of like advanced protection measures still get to twiddle the knobs and make full use of the expensive licensing that they're paying. So you have like the secure default approach out of the box, often now more accompanied with like a generative AI kind of copilot or something like that. And then you have then flexibility in the product. It's just super hard to build.
Yeah, this is an interesting trade-off that we have to do, and there's many trade-offs in inverted products that I want to talk about. And before we go to Dario, I wanted to ask one question to you, Tim. Fiddling with the knobs, do you ever get to deploy products just as default, or do you need to always fiddle with the knobs?
Oh, never. I was just going to say, like, the secure by default is great. I wish more companies would do it, but we always have kind of the opposite. We don't want the default. We want some things to get ratcheted up and be extra secure in the enterprise. And then there's always this, 5% of, yeah, but you still need to connect the account for the printer, and it's a special printer that prints barcodes that hasn't had a firmware update in 20 years. And you're like, yes, and you need to make all of those work in the same identity space. Like, yes, you have the best and the worst at the same time.
Yeah, so basically you'd love simplicity, but reality means you have to have control.
Exactly.
And simplicity for SMBs, Dario, you talked about it before. How do you think security is perceived inside SMBs, and do you think they all actually really want simplicity, or do they want something more?
Well, the thing is that the SMB space is a really broad space. I mean, you talk from the carpenter with one employee up to non-government organizations with 50 or 100 or 200 organizations like that are in like operate in a different space. But in general, I think SMBs expect their suppliers to make the right decisions and provide them the right defaults. I often use a book that was written in the 60s in the US as a reference. Like in the 60s, there's a book, Unsafe at Any Speed, by Ralph Nader, who was a on and off third-party candidate in the US. And he wrote the book about the car industry having to take over more accountability. Like at some point, there was a legal case where the car manufacturer would say, well, you can't drive 80 miles an hour without that spoiler, and it's in the manual, you know that. And we sell these products to SMBs in a similar way. We expect SMBs to know what they need to do to be secure. But I think the perception on the SMB side is that what they're getting from the large tech companies is good enough. And also there's a perception that they don't have to care about it because they're not targeted. But just because they're not targeted traditionally by nation state attackers, that doesn't mean they're not targeted by other types of sophisticated large scale attacks. And I think that there's really the gap between perception of how much at risk are you. Like there's really scary statistics and research out there that like 60% of SMBs would not survive a sophisticated attack. Like they would go bankrupt. 60% go bankrupt after a sophisticated attack within 6 months. That's a huge damage for the economy. So the perception really is, the expectation is that they get what they need, and the perception is that they don't need as much as others. And I think there are two gaps that need to be closed there on both sides of the market.
Yeah, and there's one stat I saw in a study from Microsoft around the security score, where they said that I think 60% of customers that actually weren't that secure still thought that they were, which is another really scary statistic. So you have your statistics saying 60% of companies, if they get an attack, game over, and then you have another statistic saying actually most companies think they are secure, but they're not, and the security score was really helping with that awareness. So I think that's another difference, that SMBs might be much less aware of.
And I think it's an ownership question. There's a different ownership level here. Like as an enterprise, you have the ability, large enterprise, you have the ability and the resources and the structure to own the outcome of your business risks. And as a small business, you need to rely on your suppliers to help you with that. And for me, those are the fundamental difference. It's not like they have to be less secure because they're small, or they have to be more secure just because they're big. But it's what the vendor can expect. And I think if the vendor owns the outcome, where they can't expect their customers, and they know they can't expect their customers to have a blue team and a red team and all those resources, then I think the expectations would align better.
For SMBs, I really think like outsourcing of your security and some of your operations is really the way to go. Like that model is really good for smaller companies because they get the expertise they really wouldn't have. I want to mention one more thing, and I'm curious to get Tim's input on this, but there is, you said like, hey, we want to tweak things and change things. We're a large enterprise. We have complex, requirements, except you're also somewhat with security, like a cost center, like you're not bringing revenue to the business. And so a lot of companies, a lot of CISOs are under pressure to reduce costs, to use things out of the box, to like, if you do customization, then, it's not only like a $1 million customization progress, but then there's ongoing maintenance on those customizations and potentially the process. And so there's like this dynamic or force to kind of use defaults or like have it just make it work out of the box. Is it real?
I'd say, yeah, there's always going to be that tension though. And I mean, I'm in an organization where we really have a very low cost security center. We spend a lot of money, but it's relative, it's incredibly efficient. And I'm very proud of that. But you also have these business requirements. They're like, yeah, I mean, yes, we want to have the default, we want to be fast and cheap, but my printers in the manufacturing plant don't print because you tried to put multi-factor on everything or whatever it is. And I think given for very large companies, that's also just the norm. You're going to pay the complexity tax because unless you're a startup or a relatively new company, my company is almost 130 years old, and we have the legacy of IT going back decades and decades. And you don't have the luxury of just working with a couple of key partners and everything being okay. You have the complexity of the world, the local markets, the legacies you have. So I think it's accepted to a large extent. But that it's also, I think, really, it's really appreciated too, because when you can say, yeah, we need to have, everything on the front end of the internet must be top security. Everything's multi-factor, everything's all of the checkboxes you'd want. Good, we can do that, and we can do that efficiently. But we can still make that printer in China work, and we can still make that barcode scanner at the truck warehouse work, etc. We have that flexibility, and people really appreciate that. Well, we let the business work, even while we do the most secure things wherever we possibly can. We've got to be pragmatic business partners.
Dario, you also had a question for Tim, I think.
Yeah, I'm super happy to have you here on the call today. Like, one of the topics we often talk about when it comes to inverted product management, it's the objectives that we have give the individuals on the teams or the teams that are different. Like if you're in a traditional product, you just go for growth and say, have more users next week or next year, have more revenue next quarter. But on the security side, it's different. Like we can't just set goals of like have more of X. But so how do you set your goals for your teams? So in order that they can be actionable, but also in order that they can be successful. Like how do you set your teams up for success by giving them the right goals?
I'm going to give you probably a very controversial answer, but I hate metrics and I love them at the same time. I love the metrics, I love the data, but trying to set goals is counterintuitive. And I mean, this whole topic of inverted product management is a really good example of, I don't want my incidents to go down in security necessarily, because incidents are driven by a number of things. It's the number of attacks or the ones that are detected, but it's also our sophistication and ability to detect and remediate them. So if we get better and I can detect more things, that number should go up. But if we do other defensive mechanisms, maybe those should go down. So there's always that tension. And I think it's really hard for people to understand. We'd all love to say, hey, security incidents are zero. But in the real world, we should be at least detecting more. We should lower our thresholds to detect them. So I don't love those traditional metrics or how fast you close a ticket. Those kind of things, they look nice on paper until you're like, yeah, but I want these cases to be open because we're leaving them open while we do a full investigation, et cetera. And I don't want to spend a lot of time there. So what I find to be helpful is having really kind of abstract goals for the org. We want our company, well, let's just say, I want our company to do its core mission because the core mission is good for the world. And keeping that foremost in the mind. Our company does a good thing, therefore we need to protect this company at all costs. That is our mission. Mission first has a nice longevity for how you think about a problem and say, hey, that's why I'm coming to work every day. I want this company to succeed. And then second of all, whatever your product or your service that you're delivering is, saying, I want it to be great. And that means totally different things. So our identity folks, or our customer identity versus internal identity, are going to have totally different experiences. And that's okay. Our networking security team is going to have a totally different concept of that. But we often talk about how are we making the company safer and all of our products safer, and how are we making a better experience, which I think goes back to the more traditional management. I want our users to love our products. I want our technology stack to be easy. I don't want people to think about cybersecurity. And in fact, a lot of times we can make it simpler, faster, better, and cheaper, and people don't know it. If we can integrate our identities, as an example, and you never have to think about it for all the thousands of services we have, that's a win. All of our web services around the world, 10,000 plus sites, we run the security stack in front of all of that. You get load balancing, caching, all of that, because security pays for it one time, but we get the benefit of securing everyone and all the speed, performance, and stuff that comes with it. So I think it's not just about numbers, it's about telling a story of why we're here and getting people to really buy into that.
Yeah. I think we see a lot of examples where just the numbers are feel easy, but then they are one-dimensional. Like, yeah, you want to drive down incidents. Well, then also you invest less in detection because if you don't detect, you don't have incidents that you have on your dashboard.
So this comes back to one of the metrics we've discussed in the past, which is the concept of damage. Like damage done to the company, because that's the one metric that moves in the same direction. If you prevent an incident, it means the damage that would have done is gone. If you detect something, then at least you stop whatever was still remaining. And if you detect faster, you even stop what has already happened. So, Tim, have you ever considered like a more end of the funnel type of metric for your org?
A little bit. One of the questions, or one of the ways I phrase this often is, did we get hacked? I mean, I'm not saying a single laptop was lost, but in the grand scheme of hundreds of thousands of people, did we lose anything? Did bad things happen? And at the end of the day, if every year we can say, nope, every single major attack against us was contained within minutes, that's a really good place to be. And that metric can fail really fast because you can have a really bad day, but at least, knock on wood, right now I can say that for years we have contained those successfully. And what I like about that is, silly as that is, you walk away and for the whole team, everybody from identity management to network security to endpoint to incident response, everyone can say, yeah, I helped. I made that safe. We're not hacked because of all the little things that we did throughout the year.
So yes, for damage in your version, but also for a vision that allows everybody to feel a part of that vision and feel that they can contribute. We've talked a bit about inverted products and building stuff for small versus big organizations. By the way, Dana, Tom, Dario, if you have more questions for Tim, he's free not to answer, but definitely fire away.
I do have one. I mean, because it's been in the news a lot recently. Is supply chain attacks one of your biggest nightmares? And how do, like, you see what happened with Salesforce, and all these companies got, not Salesforce got hacked, but the integration in, and like there's all this collateral damage now from that.
So I would say, I think it's really important to define this, because when we talk about supply chain risk or third-party risk management, it means totally different things to different people. So let me just slice it really quick, because there's one, like our suppliers, our manufacturers, people we partner with. Generally, we think we do due diligence. Make sure that they're reasonably controlled. You can't run other company's security program for them or risk management program. If they're doing the most reasonable things, they're a reasonable partner, that's great. And that's true for everyone. But the supply chain of all the little pieces that you incorporate, that terrifies me. It's one of my top risks that I talk about, because I think it was 2021 or around there when the SolarWinds hack happened. That was one that I think was fantastic to talk to people about. So you've got SolarWinds and you had Log4j, two things that are like nightmares for me. You would never say no to SolarWinds. Everybody used it for different reasons. And you can put any risk management process you want to audit the company, et cetera. You can't stop a nation state from hacking one of your partners and you happen to use that piece. I mean, that's the reality of, if you trust something in your network or your infrastructure, well, you're trusting them. I don't know how we solve that, because zero trust networking can help with some things and all this, risk reduction. But at the end of the day, you have to trust people, and you can't audit every line of code across every system. I don't know if it's an unsolvable problem, but it feels like it right now with some of this third-party stuff, because you can't, you have to accept some risk, and it's really hard to figure out what the right level is for third-party data and services.
Right. And you also had recently the JavaScript libraries that were open source that had, like malware put into them to steal. So the attacks are coming from all sides, not even on your core infrastructure. A lot of it is, like we talk about, like sophisticated attackers. A lot of their focus is on what I call seams, or the integration points, or the third parties you bring in, because those seem to be the weak points in your systems. And it is a tough. I mean, basically all you can try to do is evaluate each of these seams and try to limit the impact, if you can, of what would happen if things go south. Right? It's a really tough problem for large enterprises.
And Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to build on what Danny just said there. And Tim, another question for you, because you're in the spotlight today. I think the point that Dana makes is right, and you said as well, you need to accept a certain degree of risk, like, like interacting with third parties is inherently risky in some way. And every time, a lot of the times when we have these conversations and put these pods out, I get really boring and I talk about like really old principles like defense in depth. Like I just can't make it very simple. So, like, I think one of the things that we talk about in our practice a lot, and I'm interested in your view, is like, how do you kind of industrialize and operationalize essentially a practice of limiting blast radius? So not eliminating risk, but then making sure that blast radius is minimized through
Yeah,
network segmentation, through identity controls, through
exactly.
kind of advanced detection and response. Like, what does that look like in a holistic way to you?
Well, I think you hit two of the three things. So one is from a network control, and it sounds, I feel like I'm a broken record in this in the company, but we don't want a network. I want to get rid of our networks. So I'm on a Chromebook and I'm on guest network, and I think it's been 6 or 7 years since I've had access to the corporate network. I literally work only on the internet intentionally. Part of it's eating our own dog food. This is the model we want. And if I can work successfully, that's a good thing. But if I take the SolarWinds or Log4j or pick whatever, imagine that my laptop had some third-party risk. It doesn't matter if it's a vulnerability or if it's a supply chain issue that delivered malware to my laptop or my Chromebook. I can't put the company at that much risk. That's the whole point. If I have no access to this entire network and I'm literally only on the guest network all the time, by its nature, I have just dramatically reduced that. It's not the only answer, but that's a wholly different threat model to think about if every employee can't touch the database, can't touch the infrastructure, or there's very, very few things that they can touch. So that's one of the reasons it's front and center in our program, is to just get people off the network, because quite frankly, for people working, and especially knowledge workers in 2025, do you really need corporate networks anymore? Or how much of it do you need? So that's been a big one. Identities, splitting identities, high risk identities versus normal identities. We don't let admins surf the internet. Like, the bad stuff comes from the internet, right? So I don't want you opening funny cat videos on your admin account. So that segregation has been very important. If you're running it as an admin, you don't run it on the laptop. You can have an admin right, but you will always have a separate identity for everything you do. And what we're trying to find is these pragmatic balances. We can't take administrative rights away from every developer in the company, but we can say, you're not going to watch cat videos with your admin rights. And you don't necessarily need the network all the time. If you do, it's going to be on demand for very limited periods of time. It's not yes or no. It's just finding out, how do you just, as you said, limit the blast radius. So when something bad happens, it's not very bad. And the third pillar was just really good incident response. In my current role, we have an amazing incident response team. We monitor, they can respond in minutes to anything in the world, and I love that. So when bad things happen, we limit the blast radius. You can't do much damage. And in that few minutes that something bad is happening, it's caught really damn quickly.
Wow.
Very
Amazing.
specific question. Sorry, you're on one very quick follow-up on the separated admin accounts, because I'm interested in that from a kind of a metaphysical perspective in two ways. So the first is, if you look at a lot of, like, for example, what is associated with like the security controls, like in the Entra stack, for example, it's all about JIT and not having separate identities, but actually cohering the identity object and then limiting it to just enough administration and so on. But that seems to be a deliberate choice that you guys have gone down a different path.
It's more of a
goes JIT, for those of you who are listening don't know, it's just in time, right? And there's also just enough. It's basically making sure that someone only has the thing they need at the time and nothing more, and it gets taken away from them as soon as they don't need it anymore.
No standing privilege. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, it's mostly about just what we can do with the legacy tools and systems we've got. So, like, in the Google admin space, just in time is how it works. I have a normal account, but then when I log in, I get a 30-minute session or a 1-hour session in the admin console. We have that in some places. And when you're working with a cloud platform, easy, no problem to implement that. For legacy applications and services, or just being an admin on your laptop, it's just have two identities is an easy one. We also have some homegrown solutions where if you want to be an admin, like, you just need to install a printer. There's a way of giving someone an admin right for 2 hours. We can do those. But part of it's just how do you be practical for our scale is something like 130,000 users globally. So you've got to find a couple of different ways to approach the same problem.
Yeah,
Sure.
and we can try to help customers also by, as inverted product managers, to develop innovative products like probably Microsoft have something like this, but I know Google launched multi-party approvals where two people have to approve one action.
Yeah.
That's another new way to solve it. And I wanted to sort of go into the final part of this recording of this podcast by trying to make it really practical. So Dario, I want to come to you, and let's imagine we want to develop a fraud detection product. And I want to ask you, how would you design it for SMBs? And then I would love to ask Tim to tell us how he would want it developed for enterprises. So Dario, why don't you start?
I mean, fraud specifically can be very vertical specific, and I think in that case, give SMBs the ability to share what they want to do with the tools, what they are needing them for, and then make decisions on how do you set the right defaults to reduce the likelihood of that fraud. I mean, there's fraud that everybody's at risk of, like account compromise. Like every account on the internet is at risk of getting phished, no matter who you are. But not every account is at risk of being used for financial fraud. So
let's make it a bit more concrete to make the example easier. Let's say you're building a product that helps companies detect whether or not a purchase is fraudulent or a real one. How would you build that for an SMB? Like, what are some of your initial thoughts? And this feels like a PM interview, by the way, but sorry about that.
It does feel like a PM interview, and I really always enjoyed those. So in like for the SMB, you have to cover the full process. I think you have to give them data that the decisions can be made of. You have to give them the processing of assessing how likely that this transaction is good or bad, and then give them actionable insights in what should they do when they're being notified that an attack or that a transaction is likely to be fraud. Because they don't have that data. So you really have to cover the whole process. SMBs don't have a data lake with all the transactions. They don't have a data lake with where they have like threat actors and malicious actors stored. So you really need to give them the whole process and give them all you need to give them is a statement. Here's a transaction that's likely fraudulent, and here's how you can take action on it.
So basically a one-stop shop, easy integration. They throw a transaction and you say yes or no to them, maybe even block it for them. Tim, if someone was building a fraud detection to detect fraud transactions for an enterprise, what would they have to do different than what we just said as a one-stop shop?
It resonates really nicely, but I would say, just like we talked about in the beginning, the first thing we'd want to do is customize it. We'd like, what is the score, and do we have a different risk score, however this is decided in Turkey versus we would in Germany, right? And as a global company, we recognize that sometimes there are also inherent biases in the technologies we deploy. We deploy a lot of, let's say, US tech-centric data, and let's say it's a anti-spam tool or a fraud detection tool. Is it going to work in China or Russia or Vietnam the same way, where maybe financial controls are different? You don't use credit cards, you use debit cards or whatever. So a lot of those biases or challenges are going to show up in a true multinational company differently. So we are always going to be able to want to tweak it. We also might want to tweak things differently on an event launch or a new country launch. So it's always going to be about tweaking and being able to do something. One thing I like that Dario said, though, is, and this is something we often don't see, or sometimes it's written for a small company, it's, what do you do with this? I mean, you can say their risk score on this transaction is 0.89. Okay. Like, what does that mean to me? So explaining why you think something's bad and maybe what to do about it. Like credit card is from this country, but it's being used from a different country's IP. Maybe we can do something with that. But often we're left with just scores that don't do a lot because they're designed for smaller sets, but we would like to resolve those. So yeah, I think a lot of customization and detail are useful for us.
So basically, you're saying where this SMB, and then I'll go to you, Tom and Dana, and where the SMB wants a one-stop shop, they just throw their transaction in and they get either even an action or verdict out. You want to put your own data in. You want to influence the decision model that is in there, and you want to influence what is done with that, and even change that over time. So to really match closely to your users. Tom, go ahead.
Thanks. There's two things I would say. First of all, I love the phrase actionable insight. I can't remember who was that said it first, but it's like it's such an important thing in the context of security products and actually security advice and inputs in general. Like, don't just tell me what it is, tell me how I can fix it. It's a really important principle for both product managers and people who work in the space in general. The other thing that I was going to say is coming back to kind of conversations on tweaking the knobs and kind of customizing it in large enterprise environments. One of the things I've seen, which can also be a risk at the SMB, but it scales and correlates with the amount of people you have and the amount of tweaking you're doing, is that you actually introduce a lot of like continuity risk there, because people move out of jobs and are maybe not as good at documenting things as they could be, and you end up introducing a lot of kind of complexity, obscurity, kind of unenumerated risk into environments whereby like configurations aren't being managed or configurations aren't being touched because the guy like got a better offer and has gone elsewhere. So like the operationalization of complex tools is more like on a day-to-day basis. It's more than just like, am I tweaking this knob appropriately for my current use case? But it's all the boring stuff as well about like, how do I actually ensure that this configuration stays valid? How do I ensure that there's like knowledge transfer and stability in the environment? So it adds another, like what Tim called, I think, like the complexity tax goes even beyond like just that initial kind of investment piece.
Yeah. Dana?
This is like, if you pull it back to the inverted PM, like this is where you make your money. Like this is where this is the hard part that good inverted PMs can do. You need to understand the requirements from both enterprise and the small businesses. You need to, Tim was talking about flexibility. Like you should have like a tenant or rule that like everything you build is built on APIs. The UI is built on API that you're going to give to the SMB businesses. The enterprise is their UI, or it's the same UI, but everything you do is accessible via an API. You want to look at the use cases and the data and try to figure out how you can create and make the product and the UI able to address 90 to 95% of the things that a customer wants to secure by default, easily clickable, but also make sure you have the flexibility of so you can tweak all these knobs. And it's a huge balancing act. And so that's kind of where that's the tough part. And it's the tough part for the customers too, because, they have all these requirements, and the PM needs to be able to sift through the requirements that are coming in from these small businesses, large enterprises, and figure out what they're really asking for, right? Because you have to talk to lots and lots of enterprises. They all ask for different things, but if you boil it down, it might be the same thing. They're really asking for the same knob, just in a different direction. Different metaphor or like use case. You have to figure all that out and be able to expose it. And that's really, that's really the tough part. But the other thing is, I really think this is a place where like AI is going to help security in the future. I talked about it before, that I said, like, I don't know why you would build a report writer into any any like SIEM system or any security systems that's doing reporting. Like, you should just ask generative AI to render whatever you want in the way you want. Tim mentioned adapters for printers that he needed to integrate in some country in a back room. Like, why can't you just say to the security guy, hey, I need to integrate to this printer and it uses SCSI. Can you just generate a driver that can integrate with this? So I think there's huge promise going forward. to simplify this and be able to build things that are adaptable to both small businesses and enterprises. But there's a lot of work to do in between, and it's really the pressures on the product managers that are trying to create these products to interpret all these requirements and make something that's flexible for both of these user bases.
Yeah. Flexibility, Dario, and then we will slowly close it.
Yeah, I mean, this wouldn't be me if I wouldn't point out the usual I always point out, like, don't prevent security, don't make security unavailable for people. And I think the building security features for SMBs versus enterprises is a really good example where a lot of product teams built great things, but believe that they only need it for large enterprises. I think large enterprises, they can pay for complexity, they can pay for regulatory requirements, and small enterprises, they should get the security they need. That's my closing argument. We see a lot of monetization. Like the other day, somebody told me that they would have to pay $6 more for their IDP to support FIDO security keys per user and month. It's just ridiculous. Or the SSO tax that people pay. I think if inverted product teams are incentivized to solve problems, they will make better decisions than if they're incentivized to feed the highest tier of their products portfolio.
Yeah, Tim, any final words for us inverted product managers all the way out there that are building the stuff that you're using day to day? Or
I have to say thank you. Thank you for balancing the enterprise versus small to medium business versus individual user, because as we've talked, it's not easy. We all want different things. And sometimes I sit in conversations with peers who aren't maybe in IT, and they're like, but why isn't this partner delivering exactly what we asked? We asked for it 3 weeks ago. Like, yeah, because we're not the only customer in the world. So I recognize the challenges here. So even if we have the big contracts, we're not the only people out here and the only customers. So I am grateful for the complexity you guys manage on our behalf.
And we are grateful that you use your things to keep the world safe and make the world better. And I think on that high note, folks, we're going to end this week's Inverted PM. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining. It's a really great honor to listen to you and sharing your knowledge about all these things. And we've learned, guys, that if we want to build security products, we have to be, how do you call it, multi-person syndrome, or what is this called, where you have to serve both SMBs and enterprises. But we also learned that there are ways to do this, to build our software in a way that makes it easier, being API first, having strong defaults, but then good configuration options on top of them. So it can be done. And that is a challenge we all face. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching wherever you are. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, in our LinkedIn group, or with this individual. And yeah, stay out there, stay fighting the good fight, keeping everybody safe. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.